see, continuity is not first and foremost the flow of discrete points all forming some homogeneous direction in motion, but rather it is the first, in its first instance, the definition of continuity is the same and single object having an identical nature with itself. It is one with itself. The first law of logic, the law of self-identity. And that principle of self-identity is counterbalanced by the second principle of opposition in logic. But in math, the diversity and the opposition of things all having their own independent and separate nature from each other is first and foremost. And then from that you can discern a single and particular thing. But in philosophy, the first and particular thing, the thing having a self-identity, or rather in logic, is the most fundamental and primal principle. And so these are just different magnitudes per se of the observer, of the reference frame, of the original source of any conception of existence. And so to stay on topic, whatever the topic may be, the zero dimension is just the discrete measure, the definition of things existing separate from each other. Boom, 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 boom. The different measures of each thing. Each thing being a different point. Not knowing what that point is, because there's no measure beyond that in the initial sense. And then once you measure it later, then it becomes into higher dimensions. But initially what it is fundamentally difference. What it is fundamentally things are distinct and separate from each other. That's what it is first. From a quantitative point of view, from a mathematical point of view. But from a philosophical point of view, what it is first is exactly its self-identity, its form, the quality of what it is. And that is its discrete measure. And that differentiates it from every other thing. And every other thing is differentiated from every other thing into a multitude of things that are discrete and different from each other. And their continuity is not necessarily the interactions they have with one another in forming some kind of homogeneous form, although that is ultimately the case also. But it is also the self-identity first and foremost in themselves. But what this self-identity is ultimately the continuity of discrete points forming and agreeing together into a single identity. And so there's never one principle prior to the other in terms of purely chronological order. You see, the chronological ordering of these principles as being one fundamental than the other is the task of a specific science. It is the subject matter of what science is aiming to do, is to say, well, one is more fundamental than the other, and therefore one is the cause of the other. But the reality is that they are all causes of each other, but still forming a particular and definite direction. They're both fundamental, but one is still more fundamental than the other. Which is more fundamental than the other? Well, at different times, one may be more fundamental than the other. But absolutely, there is one that is still more fundamentally primary than the other. And so it is ultimately this contradiction, this inherent contradiction, that the chronological ordering of concepts and principles cannot fully capture. But we have to put things in a chronological order, in a subsequent series, where there is a certain flow and direction of experiences. And so when you look out into the idea of a phi phenomena, which we pointed out in other discussions, but we defined it, but we never explained the essential motion of it. Like, how does two discrete images or conceptions of different moments, one placed in a alternating subsequent order of one taking the place after the other, constitutes some continuous motion, or ultimately some happening, they form an event. And the reason why when you take, for example, two images of the same object doing different things, or rather the same object having a change in its form while remaining the same at two different moments, it constitutes some kind of continuous motion, even though the two instances are completely discrete from one another. They are not the same moment. They are different images, let's say. And the reason why is because the mind ultimately perceives it that way. The mind perceives two distinct instances forming a continuous duration of motion is because when you have an image, let's say one man lifting up his leg and one like up, and then the next image is the leg going down, you see, and you rapidly alternate that one after the other. So you show one and then you remove that thing, you just show it, and in place you show the other one automatically after the first one, and then you remove the second one, you automatically show a third one, let's say him lifting his leg up to the left rather than to the right, and you alternate these images right after another. The mind sees them as part of the same continuous duration, and therefore it forms a continuity in time. And the reason why the mind is capable of doing that is because the mind observes the first image as going away, and then in place sees the second image as coming into being. And what the mind ultimately did in that instance was observe both images simultaneously at an instant. The mind just saw the leg go up and just saw the leg go down, and they just happened and they formed that instance. But when there are so many distinct moments concurring right after another, it appears that there is a length of time that takes up a certain amount of time. You see, oh shit, now the man has been walking for an hour. How many steps does he have to take to form that hour? How many images have to be played right after another to form that hour in the attention of the observer? See, the intention of the observer is what's maintaining that duration of time, as per the description of the phi phenomena. There is 1,000 images being played right after another, each image alternating after another, and the attention of the observer maintains the same duration of time and sees one just happening and sees one just ceasing to happen, and then sees the third one happening, and then sees the fourth one happening right after the third one, the third go away, and sees the simultaneity of one ceasing and one coming into being. He seizes, and I'm not saying S-E-E, but C-A-S-E. He seizes, or rather captures, the moment where one came into being and the moment where one ceased out of being. The instance of one coming in and coming out. coming into being, coming out of being. He's witnessing that simultaneity of one thing coming into being and the other one coming out of being. And therefore he's seeing that happening rapidly for a certain, for a certain rate, and therefore translates that rate into a duration, length of time. And so the zero dimension is just simply these discrete moments having an existence, having their own moment, their own measure of an instance in time. They are instances in time. And the ordinary observation and the faculty of the mind just misses these instances of a thing coming in and coming out of being. It just sees things as a one continuous occurrence and happening all the time. But what it misses is that this continuous duration of time is first and foremost a discrete measure